it. I can explain the Virgin Mary thing. It's mineral water spray. There used to be a palm tree there, and spray and left it there, and they cut the palm tree down so people could see it. Okay, no big deal. I trust you're not putting your faith and your religion based on icons like that. But what about these other things? I claim that it's the same principle. That is, Kyle brought up the fine-tune problem. That is the fact that there's all these different anthropic adjustments. The universe is structured in such a way. It's just so carefully balanced. If it wasn't this way, it's not that we wouldn't be here, but there'd be some other species, or it'd be something like from Star Trek, where you get these people with 2 eyes and gnarly things on their forehead, and they speak English with a Klingon accent, wherever they speak English with a Klingon accent in the universe. It's that nothing would exist. And so you have all these different, the electrical force between a proton and an electron, and the Planck constant times the speed of light, and Newton's gravitational constant G, and they have dozens of these. These are all real examples. These aren't just made up by an apologist, and I'm going to get up there and tell you these constants aren't real, or that the universe is not fine-tuned. It is. Next slide. Question is, why is it fine-tuned, and what are we to make of this? Well, there's several different answers, half a dozen different answers to this. But even if I can't answer it at all, or even if I'm wrong, that doesn't mean God did it. It just means it's a mystery. We don't know what it is. This is the principle I want you to take home tonight, just the one thing. For example, in the 17th century, there was what was called the plane problem. Newton identified, after his theory of gravity was published, that there is this weird phenomenon in the solar system. All the planets are in a plane. They're in the same plane of the ecliptic, it's called. They're not like this and so on. They're all in a plane except for weird Pluto, which is probably just an errant moon. So for Newton, the explanation is God did it. That's the way God set up the solar system. Nobody makes that argument today, because we now know exactly why the planets are all in a plane. It has to do with clouds of gas condensing into stars. So the problem is of hitching your faith to some scientific argument about fine-tunedness or some weird anomaly that scientists can't yet explain. What are you going to do with your faith when we come up with an explanation? Next slide. So, for example, here's another answer to the fine-tune problem. Maybe our universe is not the only universe. Maybe there's multiple bubble universes, lots of universes. Stephen Hawking suggests, in fact, that quantum fluctuations lead to the spontaneous creation of teeny universes out of nothing. And he means nothing. Most of the universes collapse to nothing, but a few will reach critical size, will expand in an inflationary manner, and will form galaxies and stars and maybe beings like us. Most of them don't. If they exist, we don't know that they exist. This is mathematically possible. We're still trying to collect data on this. Next slide. The latest issue of Scientific American just came out last week, has a whole issue devoted to this very subject. It's no longer science fiction. Now, cosmologists are beginning to devise ways to test, empirically test, to find out if there are other universes other than our own. So, in summary, if each of these different bubble universes, and there may be an infinite number of them, all have slightly different laws of nature, slightly different fine-tuned, not so fine-tuned, terribly tuned for life, and so on. All the ones that are terribly tuned and not so fine-tuned won't give rise to life. Any of them that are like ours, and if there's enough of them, and if there's an infinite number of them, that's enough, any of them that are like ours may give rise to sentient beings like us who ask the question, where did we come from? That's one answer. It may be wrong, but if it's wrong, it doesn't make the God hypothesis right. It just means we don't know yet. Next slide. So, continuing on the design thing. The question is, what made the whale's flipper? This is just one of hundreds of examples I could use. The whale's flipper has this pretty nifty design for cutting through the water. The whole body of the whale is a fusiform body. The head doesn't have a neck and shoulders. They just all blend together for cruising through the water. It's hydrodynamic instead of aerodynamic. But if you actually take the skin off, you see what the flipper looks like. It looks like your arm. Now, why would an intelligent designer design a not-so-intelligently looking flipper? In fact, it looks like our flipper, except we don't have a flipper, we have an arm. The answer is because a top-down designer didn't build it. A bottom-up tinkerer called evolution did. Next slide. So, for example, if humans were designed by God, we might look something like this. To alleviate the lower back problems we have, more vertebrate that are thicker. To alleviate the problems of blood flow in the legs and blood collection in the legs, you have stronger veins and more valves. You have much larger buttock muscles here to hold this upper thing. Your ears would be slightly different, and so on. The arms would be shorter. The rib cage would be larger to hold the organs. The point is this. Yes, it looks like design has happened, but is it really intelligent design? Does it look like an omniscient, omnipotent being really made us with all the little flaws in our design? Next slide. Another question, evolution or God or intelligent designer. We have two different hypotheses here. Dr. Hovind, God, and Kyle, intelligent designer, id, whoever id is. The question is, like, let's just say, just take this one sequence of the evolution of the ceratopsians, like the Triceratops, the most famous, the little three-horned dinosaur, Triceratops. Where'd it come from? Okay, regardless of whether the picture is right or not, it's roughly right, because we have quite a few fossils here. When did id, or God, interject his influence? Did he just create the general form and then evolution created all the other forms? Or did id, God, interject at each of the family level, or at the genus level, or at the species level? When does God intervene when he's intervening? At every single individual born, is God tweaking the system? You will not find consensus among creationists on this question. It's very interesting that they dissent among themselves about how often and when God intervenes. Anything from he set the whole system up at the beginning and stepped out and just let it run by itself, to he tweaks every single little molecule and genome in every single one of us that is born, and everything in between. Next slide. So, how do we know evolutionary theory is true? It's not true, capital T, true in a religious sense. It's not true in a political sense. Not true in a legal sense. You've heard two legal metaphors tonight. This is the wrong metaphor. Science is not the law. It's a different way of thinking completely. This is why when lawyers try to do science and scientists try to do law, they get messed up. They shouldn't do that. There's different ways of thinking. Science traffics in fine shades of gray, with probabilities of being more closer to truth or less closer to truth. But there is no capital T truth. However, we are confident that it's provisionally true. That is, could be wrong. We'll see. But it gives a coherent explanation of what we know. It's conciliant. That is, independent lines of inquiry all jump to the same conclusion. And it predicts new findings which so far have been confirmed empirically. For example, next slide. Just on the age of the Earth question, I just threw this in a sort of in the limo driving over here typing because I realized we were supposed to discuss the age of the Earth. I mean, how do we know how old the Earth is? A bunch of different ways. Potassium-argon dating. There's half a dozen different radioactive decay dating techniques. Carbon-14 dating. Plus the age of the moon rocks, the age of the solar system, the age of the universe. Now, this is the point. These different ages that scientists infer from the different techniques are not done in one lab or at one conference by one committee that says, hey, look, you know, we got that Creationist conference coming up. We got to get our story straight on what our date is. It doesn't work that way. These are different scientists in different fields who go to different conferences and read different journals and don't even know each other. And they all independently come up with the same rough range of dates. The Earth is about 4.5 billion years old, give or take a couple 100,000 years. The universe is about, Dr. Hovind, it's about 14.5 billion now, we think. And it changes. But it's not changing like between 6,000 years and 20 billion. It's changing between 14, 14.5, maybe 15, maybe 13.5, depending on who's doing the measuring. Now listen, if they all came up with the exact same number, then I would be suspicious that somebody was cooking the data. But they don't. The numbers vary all over the board, but they vary within a range. And the fact that they vary, and yet they're still within that tight range, gives me great confidence that this is correct. Next slide. Another example. Tests of evolutionary theory. Early fossils of life should contain only single-cell organisms. And they do. You will not find a single human or any mammalian fossil in a bedding plane that has trilobites. Not one anywhere ever. Why is that? 2, organisms adapted to similar environments should evolve similar morphologies. They